Chapter 2. Trust is a must. I've never fully trusted anyone my entire life. I haven't had that luxury, she tells me. Where does that come from? I ask. My mother had mental problems and she left when I was young. I ended up taking care of my brothers and sisters. The one person who I wanted to trust left when I needed her the most. How has that impacted your life? I protect myself. Everyone has the potential to hurt me like my mother did, so I don't let them in. If I don't let them in, they can't hurt me. How has this shown up in your life? I do my best to avoid situations where I need to trust or show weakness. This distrust inevitably sabotages the relationships because I'm doing everything in my power not to be hurt. Better that I push you away than feel the pain of that loss. When interacting with others or coaching people in relationships, the first and most important question I ask is there trust? Trust is vital because it establishes the basis for everything else in a relationship. In relationships with no trust, every interaction reflects that. Words are carefully selected to stay emotionally protected. Vague references to past experiences are made as justifications to keep people at arm's length. Remember the time when you did that? She always causes trouble. In an environment of distrust, there can be no deep connection. The less we trust another, the more disconnected we will feel from him or her. This is certainly not to say that lack of trust is unwarranted. People spend years falling into negative patterns with family and friends. There are reasons why trust is eroded over the years. The question that rings strongest in my head is, if there is no trust, then why are we discussing anything else? Without trust, nothing else matters. You and your spouse could read dozens of relationship books together full of great tools, but if those tools don't address the fundamental lack of trust, they will ultimately fail. We intuitively feel that loss or lack of trust is a giant wall in a relationship. Studies show that we actually turn off parts of our brain when interacting with people we don't trust. The part that allows for empathy or openness to feedback, which are vital for healthy relationships. Think about that for a moment. When you do not trust another person, parts of your brain are literally shutting down. One study used brain scans to analyze what they labeled as in-group bias to show how we treat people when we're experiencing them in or out of our group. They discovered that when people feel part of a group membership, it influences their brain activity. We instinctively distrust people outside of our group, whether that be based on family, community, nationality, race, ethnicity, or other factors. It sadly goes as far as reduced sensitivity when watching people outside of our group in pain. In another study, researchers discovered that we receive feedback from people we perceive to be in our groups versus from outsiders vastly differently. They concluded that the mere presence of a person from an outgroup can alter how the brain processes feedback. The brain can be impaired from receiving certain learning signals when the person observing is an outgroup member. Simply put, we're wired to be distrusting of people with whom we are unfamiliar. When I read this study, a light bulb went off in my head as I saw how I shielded myself from those whom I do not trust. It was the exclamation point that if we do not trust, there is no reason to discuss anything else. I'm regularly asked by couples to coach them in their relationship. My answer is always the same. Sure, if you both are willing to admit that you've been the problem all along. By watching their response to that question, I can tell how far along the relationship has fallen into distrust. If there is an unconscious shake of the head or a wince, then I know the basis for my help, trust, is not yet present. That's not to say the couple won't be able to work things out. It's just to say before we discuss what we believe the problems are, we have to determine if there is space to look at the core experiences, perceptions, and beliefs that have created distrust to begin with. Are they able to see beyond all the stories they've told themselves about the other? Typically, what people are really looking for is someone from the outside to validate their beliefs. They want to feel seen and heard. When seeking outside counsel for support, it's often with the hope that if you can't hear it from me, then maybe you'll understand it when it comes from a therapist. What I've seen over and over is that once we've given up on our partner's ability to see us, we immediately fall into distrust. We use this distrust to protect ourselves. Therefore, it's almost always accompanied with blame. I'm this way because of you. If you just listened to me, it wouldn't need to be this way. This is exactly why I've set trust to be the foundation of all my relationships and my primary focus before anything else. In my own life, if I feel that trust is even slightly eroding in a relationship, I address it immediately. The challenge is to recognize it soon and address it with love and compassion. It happens quickly. An offhand remark and jest can trigger a person without them even knowing it. There are many behavioral signals of distrust. People avoid eye contact. They don't meet you with a traditional warm greeting. They are quick to end the contact. The other person will most certainly feel that something is off, but is unable to address it, which reinforces the distrust. If left unaddressed for too long, the result is that many problems will arise in the relationship over time, even when neither party even remembers what happened to create the distrust in the first place. The dynamic of reinforcing distrust is common. Person A acts in distrust. Person B feels distrust. Person B acts in distrust. Person A feels distrust. This dynamic creates a negative reinforcing loop. One negative experience is met with another negative experience, and these continue to reinforce one another. A moment of discomfort in a conversation is internalized and begins to fester. Resentment grows. An innocent remark slowly turns into a breaking point in a relationship. In time, this loop of distrust solidifies and becomes stronger and stronger, invariably hitting a breaking point. Unfortunately, people often seek outside support at the point that distrust is so great that it's difficult, if not impossible, to shift. The stories have become so true that they are stuck in their beliefs and there is no way out. The pattern of blame further solidifies distrust, and the only real option is separation. The alternative ending to this story is addressing judgment and the resulting distrust in the moment. This takes a tremendous amount of self-awareness. But what's the alternative? The irony is that the one who passes judgment is unknowingly separating in the relationship while blaming the other for the separation. If you look back at the systems diagram in this book, you will see that each of the behaviors is reinforcing the next. The challenge which each of us faces is asking ourselves what can be an incredibly painful question. How is my behavior creating their behavior? Or stated another way, can it be that they are acting in a distrustful manner because I'm treating them in a distrustful manner? This is nearly impossible for one judging to recognize. The judgment, combined with a lack of self-awareness, is often the catalyst for a deteriorating relationship. The reason for this is quite straightforward. At the moment we interpret another's words and get triggered, we're not giving the other person a chance to clarify and open the possibility for connection. Instead, we've decided to step out of the relationship. It happens so quickly that we're almost never aware of it. A wife misinterprets her husband's words and gets triggered. She's judging her husband, and in that judgment, separating from him. Now, when her husband reacts to her judgment, she will feel the need to defend it, thus reinforcing it. They both dig in their heels to defend their judgments and reactions as the distrust grows and the disconnection widens. Once we've projected a belief onto our partner, for example, he's lazy or she's a liar, he's heartless, we now need to continually look for things that validate that view. The psychological term for this is confirmation bias. Once we have a belief, we're biased to look for things that support that belief. If we believe our partner is lazy, then we'll listen to everything they say with a focus on where they're deluding themselves. Here's a conversation I experienced with one such couple. Her: when's the last time you took out the trash? Him: I did it yesterday. Yeah, because I asked you. Him: how about last week? Her: well, that's because we were cleaning the refrigerator together. Him: you never see what I do. You're always getting down on me. Her: you're not doing the things we've agreed to. What you hear in this exchange is that the wife does not trust the husband. Imagine trying to support this couple. If a therapist says anything that does not validate her belief he is lazy, he or she runs the risk of alienating the partner who is trying to make a point. We all face the challenge of the therapist balancing listening well to a person without taking sides, which will create distrust. The question I have sat with much of my life is, how can we help couples when the trust is gone in a relationship? Is it even possible? In TV dramas, we often see a common scene where two characters fight and then afterwards reconcile. The reconciliation almost always comes after one of the characters shares his or her experiences so vulnerably that the other character is compelled to empathize. It becomes virtually impossible to project negatively on the other because he or she is bearing his or her soul. When we focus more on the things we have in common and less on our differences, there's an opportunity for increased empathy. From a place of empathy, it's much easier to approach difficult topics in a healthy and productive way. I can hear some readers saying, Andy, that's much easier said than done. I don't want to imply that it's easy, but again, what's the alternative? To make this concrete, let's take the same example above and see how the dynamic looks very different when the husband responds with empathy to the first cue that something's off, rather than reacting defensively. When's the last time you took out the trash, she says. He replies, before I answer, can you tell me what makes you ask the question? Yes, you're not taking it out and I'm trying to make a point. I'm sorry that this is causing you frustration. I can see that I've been neglecting it in the past few weeks because I've had a lot on my mind. It's not intentional, I'm just distracted. Yes, I've seen that. May I share a bit about what's going on? Okay. I've not been feeling well. I did not want to say anything because I was hoping it would get better, but it's not. I see that in trying to take care of myself, I've let some things drop and I should have told you, but I was scared. I'm sorry, I didn't know. In this interaction, we move from the symptom, the trash, to the source, the reason. Because one of the partners is able to find empathy, the other is moved to connect meaningfully. It's exactly in these moments, the ones that almost always turn into fights, where we have the biggest opportunity to connect. We're often looking at the symptoms of people's behavior and ignoring the source. It's convenient. We don't need to understand or help them understand. We just want things the way we want them. And yet, we want the same consideration in return. In trusting relationships, we do not try to prove anyone wrong. We try to figure out what is not going well so that we can get even closer and have deeper trust. The lesson in this chapter: begin with, where am I not trusting? The exercise: 2 roads. In this chapter, we discussed how a lack of trust bleeds into how we interact with others. It's not always easy to see this in ourselves. The following questions will help you see where you're in relationship to different people in your life. Think of 2 people, one whom you trust and one not so much. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I completely distrust and 10 being I completely trust, how would you rank yourself in relationship to each of these people? So let's begin with the person you trust. On a scale of 0 to 10, what's your trust with that person? Now let's look at a person you don't trust. On a scale of 0 to 10, where would you score them? Now reflect on those 2 scores and ask yourself, how do you treat these 2 people differently? First, look at the person you trust. Now consider the person you trust less. If you were to treat the person you distrust similarly to the person you trust, how do you believe that might change the person's behavior with you? The recap: it can be challenging to trust. Where did the distrust begin? It's a chicken and egg scenario. Does the other person not trust me because I've never trusted them? Or is there something I have unknowingly done to create distrust? Finding that answer is not always easy. In order to work back to trust, we must first start by giving trust. We must trust ourselves to be vulnerable without even knowing if the other will meet us there. It is emotionally risky, but it is the only way to test what's actually possible.